The next person that I have the honor to present is a man who has served with our beloved Senator Byrd for 36 years in the Senate, almost longer than any other senator. Would you please join me in giving a West Virginia welcome to the Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Bishop, Reverend clergy, Mona and Marjorie, the entire Byrd family. If you didn't already know it, it's pretty clear the incredible esteem your father was held in. I know you've known that your whole life. To my fellow members of the Senate, you know, I was telling the President when I got elected the last time, and I had the great honor of running with the President, and I was elected Vice President and United States Senator in the same day for my 7th term. And in talking to, and I got sworn in for that 7th term because we thought we might need a vote there in those first couple weeks. And every time I sat with a leader, I never called Senator Byrd Senator. I always called him leader. When I sat with a leader, I could see that look in his face, and he said, "Joe, you sure you're making the right decision giving up the Senate for Vice President?" Because as the senators know, he revered the Senate. As Danny Inouye said going into the chamber when we were going in to honor your father, yesterday we walked in together. He said, "You know, Joe, had you stayed, you'd be number 2. I'm still number 2, Danny. I'm still number 2. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, yesterday I had the opportunity to pay my respects to Leader Byrd as he lay in repose in the Senate chamber. I met the family then and again today, and the last time that happened was 50 years ago. The last time that that chamber I revere served as a resting place for anyone was 50 years ago. But although I and my colleagues behind me revere the Senate, Robert C. Byrd elevated the Senate. Other great men and their families would have chosen for them to lay in state in the rotunda. But Bob Byrd and his family chose to lay in state in the Senate chamber. And to me, this is completely appropriate, having served with them for 36+ years. For the Senate chamber was Robert C. Byrd's cathedral. The Senate chamber was his cathedral, and West Virginia was his heaven. And there's not a lot of hyperbole in that. Every person in the Senate, as my colleagues behind you can tell you, brings something special about them. I'll never forget having privately criticized a senator when I was there the first year. I was sitting with the previous leader, Senator Mansfield, who was an incredible guy. And he told me that, he said, why are you upset? And I told him about a particular senator railing against something I thought was very worthy, the Americans with Disability Act. And he went on to tell me that every member of the Senate represented something in the eyes of their state that was special and represented a piece of their state. Well, if there was ever a senator who was the embodiment of his state, if there was ever a senator who in fact reflected his state, it was Robert C. Byrd. The fact of the matter is, the pick of the banjo, the sweet sound of the fiddle, ramp dinners in the spring, country fairs in the summer, the beauty of the laurels in the mountains, the rush of the rapids through the valleys, these things not only describe West Virginia, but from an outsider's point of view, who's been here many times at the invitation of Jennings Randolph and Robert C. Byrd, it seems to me they define a way of life. It's more than just a state. And Robert C. Byrd was the most fierce defender of not only the state, but the way of life. I think the most fierce defender that probably this state has ever known in its history. You know, Robert Byrd did use the phrase, "When I die, West Virginia will be written on my heart," and I used to kid him. I said, "You have so many Scotch-Irish down there, you don't acknowledge it was an Irish Catholic named Joyce who said that first." Reverend, he quoted everybody else, but when he used that phrase, he'd never acknowledge that it was James Joyce who said, "When I die, Dublin will be written in my heart." And all he would do is laugh. The fact of the matter is, West Virginia was not only written in his heart, but he wore it on his sleeve. He took such pride in this place. He took such pride in all of you. I remember he asked me one of the few races he had, there was a race, whether I'd come down, because I was the young guy, and I'd come down and demonstrate to everybody that I could not keep up with Robert C. Byrd, which happened to be true. And I think, Nick, you were at the dinner. We had a Jefferson Jackson Day dinner and down here, and Robert C. Byrd did something never happened before with me in all the dinners I've spoken at. He stood up and he said, "We're honored to have Senator Joe Biden from Delaware here tonight, and Joe, I'd like to introduce you to West Virginia." Then he spent, as Nick will remember, the next probably 10 minutes talking about everyone in the audience by name, where they were from, what they had done, how they had fought through difficulty. And then he said, kind of like Johnny Carson, "Here's Joe." Well, I thought it was pretty impressive, literally. Robert C. Byrd asked me to speak, but he knew the privilege was mine, not the people to whom I was speaking. He was devoted to all of you like few senators in the 37 years I was there, 36 plus years I was there, that I have ever known. He was fiercely devoted, as you've all heard, to his principles. Even once he became power, he always spoke truth to power, standing up for the people he proudly was part of. And you've heard it many times a day, but it bears repeating again in defense of the Constitution he revered. I always wore a flag pin, but I was afraid he'd be looking down today, because every time I'd wear the flag pin on the floor, he would grab me, take my pin, and put on a Constitution pin. That's the pin I'm wearing. So, boss, I'm wearing the pin. Robert C. Byrd said many things, but he once said, "As long as there is a forum in which questions can be asked by men and women who do not stand in awe of a chief executive, and one can speak as long as one's feet will allow one to stand, the liberties of the American people will be secure." 11 presidents knew Robert C. Byrd. He served, as he pointed out, concurrently with them, not under them. And 11 presidents, were they all here and 2 are here, can attest to the fact that he always showed respect, but never deference, and he stood in awe of none. He had an incredible, prodigious memory that I will not take the time to regale you about. I just remember one time sitting with the Queen of England at a formal dinner, and he recited the entire lineage of the Tudors, and every year each one had served. And she sat there, and I thought her bonnet was going to flip off her head. It was like, what did I just hear? She learned about relatives she probably forgot she had. As also noted, Robert C. Byrd was a parliamentary library, a keeper of the institution of the Senate, and he was the institution itself. But to me, and many people here today, like guys I see, Bill Bradley and Jim Sasser, who've long left the Senate for greener pastures, and I hope better remuneration. We used to kid about that too, but for a lot of us, he was a friend, and he was a mentor, and he was a guide. Nick and I were talking a little bit earlier because Nick, I commuted every day for 36 years in the United States Senate, 250 miles a day, and Robert C. Byrd was a stickler about when he set votes. And I'd drive down from Washington, and I'd call Nick on this big old car phone I first had. It was about that big. And I'd say, Nick, I can see the dome. Hold the vote, I can see the dome. Finally, Nick caught on, and he said, Joe, or Mr. Senator, how far away can you see the dome? Because he'd be the one to go to the leader and say, can you hold the vote 2 more minutes for Biden? As long as I was behaving, he held the vote. But when I found myself in disagreement, I'd stand there to catch a 7 o'clock train. He'd set a vote for 7 o'clock. And I'd walk up to him, and I needed 7 minutes from the chamber. And Nick knows this. I'd walk up to him, I'd stand, always stood down in the well, and he stood in that first riser. And I'd say, Mr. Leader, I know we got an hour. I said, you set the vote for 7. Any possibility of setting it 10 to 7 so I could get the train? And he'd go like this. He'd look at the clock, look at me, look at the clock, and say, no. No. But that's because I misbehaved once. I voted with George Mitchell on a matter relating to minors, and that was a big mistake. He literally took the roll call sheet. There's these sheets, as the staff members know, with every senator's name and how they voted. He took the roll call sheet, had it framed, had my name circled in red, and literally had it screwed to the ornate door frame in his office then as the chairman of the Appropriations Committee. So every single senator coming to see him would walk out, and at eye height they'd see Biden circled in red, and know darn well they better not vote against Robert C. Byrd ever. You think I'm joking? I'm not joking. But then I got in his good graces. I tried to run for president. He said, I don't want any senators running for president. I said, why, Mr. Leader? He said, because you never come back and vote when I need you. So I made a promise that no matter where I was, if he called me and said he needed my vote, I'd drop whatever I was doing and I'd come. And I kept the commitment, the only one I might add. That got me back in his good graces again. The point is that this is a man who